This is the brief on the economic trap known as stagflation. So if you've ever wondered why economists kind of lose sleep over oil prices, we have to look back to the 1970s. See, the oil cartel OPEC decided to cut production, and boom, energy costs just skyrocketed, sparking this crisis that hit pretty much every wallet on the planet. First, the immediate result was just this massive wave of global inflation. Costs were rising like wildfire. I mean, the US and Europe were battling double-digit price hikes, but for some places it was so much worse. Israel, for instance, saw inflation peak at a staggering 450%. Just imagine that. Second, all this chaos created a terrifying new term, stagflation. It's a combination of two things, right? Stagnation, which means a recession and high unemployment, and, of course, inflation. Before this, everyone thought these two things couldn't happen at the same time. Prices were supposed to drop in a recession. Well, the 70s proved that theory wrong. And finally, here's the trap for central banks. To stop inflation, they have to raise interest rates, but that kills jobs. To save jobs, they have to lower rates, but that just makes prices soar. You literally can't fix one problem without making the other one worse. So stagflation forces leaders to make these incredibly painful trade-offs, reminding us that economics doesn't always have easy solutions, just really difficult compromises. Brief on stagflation. It's basically the ultimate economic nightmare scenario, where living costs skyrocket while jobs just disappear, and understanding it is absolutely crucial for making sense of today's confusing economy. So first, let's look at how this trap actually works. Imagine stagnant growth, high unemployment, and persistently high inflation all hitting us at exactly the same time. This creates an impossible dilemma for central banks. Raising interest rates fights inflation but causes severe job losses, while lowering them boosts employment but makes inflation absolutely explode. Think about it. How do they choose between protecting your job and projecting your grocery bill? It's kind of like a medical treatment where the cure for one symptom makes the other one fatal. Second, to see how we fall into this mess, we really got to look at its famous historical trigger. During the 1970s oil crises, Middle East conflicts caused global energy costs to literally quadruple overnight. This wasn't consumers going on a massive spending spree, right? This was imported inflation, driven entirely by a massive global supply shortage. So if inflation is imported from an oil shortage overseas, does squeezing domestic wallets actually solve the problem? Finally, this brings us to the modern threat. Just like the 70s, we're seeing similar supply-driven inflation today, led by oil, gas, and fertilizer. The danger right now is that central banks might repeat history by using blunt interest rate hikes to fight these supply shortages. They're risking higher unemployment without actually fixing the root cause. It's essentially like trying to fix a broken global supply chain by forcing local workers to take a pay cut. Ultimately, surviving stagflation requires surgical economic planning and real supply solutions, not just blunt interest rate hikes.
Stagflation. It's the ultimate economic nightmare. Stagnant growth, high unemployment, and persistently high inflation hitting all at once. And suddenly, everybody's terrified we're heading right back to the 1970s. We know what it is, but you might be wondering, why is it so hard to fix? First, treating one symptom literally makes the others worse. Raise interest rates to fight inflation, you kill jobs, but print money for growth and inflation spikes. Think of it like the government and the central bank fighting over the steering wheel. The Fed tries to cool inflation by hiking rates, while governments recklessly spend. Luckily, right now, we're just seeing lowercase s stagflation, with modest unemployment and steady GDP, rather than the capital S, 1970s kind, featuring 7 to 8% unemployment and double-digit inflation. So if it's not the 70s yet, what actually caused that historic crisis? Second, it wasn't greedy workers demanding wages. It was caused by massive external supply shocks, like the OPEC oil embargoes in 73 and 79, and the U.S. ditching the gold standard in 1971. Today's inflation is similarly supply-driven by global shortages in oil, gas, and wheat. So if prices are surging from global supply shortages, how exactly does squeezing the domestic worker fix anything? Since policymakers are stuck between a rock and a hard place, someone has to pay. Finally, stagflation policies massively increase wealth inequality. Artificially lowering interest rates inflates asset prices, making the wealthy richer while regular folks get crushed by underemployment and shrinkflation. Honestly, it's no surprise safe haven assets like gold are up over 40% this year. Stagflation is a policy trap born from supply shocks that ultimately forces the working class to foot the bill while the rich retreat to their assets.
Brief on stagflation. It's the scary economic buzzword of the moment, and we're going to cut through the panic to uncover what it actually means for our wallets and the global economy. First, let's break down this ultimate economic catch-22. It hits when three warning lights flash: high inflation, increasing unemployment, and slow economic growth. Fixing it is like trying to put out a kitchen fire by flooding your entire house. Raising interest rates fights inflation but crushes employment, while printing money boosts growth but sends prices soaring. Now that we know what the monster looks like, are we standing face to face with it right now? Second, let's compare the capital S 1970s stagflation to today's lowercase s risk. Back then, we saw double-digit inflation, contracting GDP, and 8% unemployment. Today, on paper, GDP looks decent, but can we actually trust these numbers? Official jobs data gets heavily revised and ignores the massive rise in gig work, underemployment, and folks dropping out of the labor force entirely. If the official data is masking the true pain in our wallets, what's the actual root cause driving this pressure? Finally, the real driver is supply, not just demand. The 1970s crisis was triggered by massive external supply shocks, like oil prices quadrupling. Today, we face the exact same structural issues. Inflation driven by supply shortages in oil, gas, fertilizer, and wheat. Think about it. If our prices are rising because of global supply chain shortages, why do central banks keep trying to fix the problem just by tweaking domestic interest rates? While we aren't in a full 1970s tailspin yet, dodging the stagflation trap absolutely requires fixing real-world supply chains, not just moving numbers around on a spreadsheet.
On stagflation from the central bank's perspective, it's basically the ultimate economic nightmare, where high inflation, high unemployment, and slow growth hit all at once. A toxic combo that leaves central bankers absolutely terrified. First, we've got to look at the dual mandate disaster. You see, central banks, like the U.S. Federal Reserve, essentially have two main jobs: keeping prices stable around a 2% target and maintaining full employment. Stagflation means they're failing both of those core goals simultaneously. So, what are they supposed to do when both warning lights are flashing red at the exact same time? Well, second, they're forced into an impossible policy trap. If they raise interest rates to fight inflation, they yank money out of the economy, leading to some brutal job losses. But if they lower rates to stimulate growth, they just flood the market with cash and drive inflation even higher. It's a cruel irony, really, because the cure for one symptom is literally the poison for the other. Finally, there's the clash with fiscal policy. Central banks actually can't win this fight alone. They desperately need strict coordination with government taxes and spending. But politicians facing short-term elections, they really hate cooling down the economy. So the central bank tries lowering inflation while the government aggressively spends cash. It's like trying to play a fine instrument with two hands, but one hand is actively fighting the other. Escaping the stagflation trap requires a painful mix of long-term central bank planning and short-term government sacrifices, a combination that's just incredibly hard to pull off.
The history and modern risks of stagflation. So, we're unpacking the ultimate economic nightmare, where prices soar but jobs vanish, to see if the ghosts of the 1970s are coming back to haunt today's economy and why it really matters to your wallet. First, what exactly is stagflation? Well, it's a toxic trio of high inflation, rising unemployment, and a stalling economy happening all at once. Central banks absolutely dread it because fixing one problem worsens the other. Think of it like a tight economic knot. If you pull the interest rate string to fight inflation, you tighten the unemployment knot. But loosening rates to save jobs, that just makes inflation unravel way faster. Second, let's look at the 1970s, the era of capital S stagflation, featuring double-digit inflation and unemployment over 7%. This wasn't just some failure of government policies, it was largely driven by massive global trade disruptions, like oil prices literally quadrupling. Which brings up a fascinating question. Are we kind of misremembering the 70s by blaming government spending, when we should really be blaming global supply chains? Finally, what about right now? In the US, we're currently facing just a lowercase s stagflation risk. Inflation is cooling, though it's still pretty sticky in housing and services, while overall GDP is strong and unemployment remains modest. But official data might be hiding deeper issues, like gig work underemployment. We aren't in 1970s territory just yet, but hey, if all three dashboard lights, growth, jobs, and prices, flash red together, that's when the real siren sounds. Ultimately, true stagflation is a rare beast, but it's a stark reminder that printing money simply can't fix a broken supply chain. Brief on the causes of stagflation. See, it's pretty much the ultimate economic nightmare, a nasty cocktail of high inflation, slow growth, and rising unemployment, and understanding its triggers is literally the only way to avoid years of economic pain. Think of it kind of like driving a car where the accelerator is stuck wide open on inflation, but the parking brake of stagnant growth is firmly pulled up. First, let's look at the spark. Supply shocks. The very first domino to fall is usually an external shock to essential supplies. Sudden spikes in the cost of global commodities, like those 1970s oil embargoes or modern jumps in gas and wheat, instantly make everything way more expensive to produce and transport. So what happens when it suddenly costs twice as much to power a factory? Well, production just slows down. Second, we add the fuel, reckless money supply. These external shocks get so much worse when governments pump printed money and stimulus into the economy while simultaneously cutting taxes. It's simple math. If you have fewer goods because of supply issues, but way more cash floating around chasing those exact same goods, prices inevitably skyrocket. Finally, we hit the trap. Policy panic. Stagflation gets totally locked in by government mismanagement. When politicians and central banks panic, like by rapidly raising interest rates or starting trade wars, they end up crushing business growth and job creation without actually fixing the original supply-side inflation. Honestly, using interest rates to cure supply shock inflation is literally like trying to fix a leaky pipe with a hammer. So stagflation isn't just an accident. It's a brutal chain reaction caused by bad luck with global supplies colliding with bad choices in government spending. Ultimately, it leaves us thinking about the incredibly delicate balance between swift government action and harsh economic reality.
The brief on stagflation, unemployment, and economic welfare. Stagflation is the ultimate economic nightmare, where high inflation collides with high unemployment and slow growth, and it severely threatens the everyday survival of the working class. You know, it's kind of like trying to put out a fire while drowning. Traditional fixes for one problem usually make the other way worse, leaving everyday people caught in the middle. First, let's look at the illusion of official employment data. Headline numbers mask a grim reality. The U.S. actually just had its largest revision ever, revealing almost 1 million jobs were completely overestimated. Plus, official counts consider people doing literally just 1 hour of gig work a week as employed. That completely hides massive underemployment and the millions who've just given up looking for sustainable work. Second, there's a devastating squeeze on real living standards. Because wages aren't keeping up with the elevated cost of living, everyday budgets are absolutely breaking. Here's a real yellow flag. Workers are being forced to drain their savings and rack up massive credit card debt just to survive and maintain basic demand. Finally, we hit a brutal policy trap that fuels inequality. When governments try to fix stagflation, they usually have to choose between protecting capital or labor. So who actually pays the price when the economy stalls out? Well, policies often turbocharge a K-shaped recovery. Lower interest rates artificially pump up asset prices for the wealthy top 10%, while the majority face safety nets, stagnant wages, and the threat of layoffs. Ultimately, the true danger of stagflation isn't just a slowing national economy, but a widening wealth divide that forces everyday workers to foot the bill.